Okay, this is a whistle-stop tour of your context for A Christmas Carol. So you're going to have to mention context in A Christmas Carol because this exam question is split over 3 assessment objectives. The first being AO1, so your ability to discuss plot, events and characters from the novella. And obviously include your quotations, so make sure that you're revising those very important quotes or using the games or any sort of apps that you've got to revise those quotes from across the whole novella, because we usually will never know what your questions are. Obviously, with this being a mock, it's a bit different. For AO2, it's your ability to analyse those quotes. So you're looking at your writer's techniques, you're going to zoom in on your language and maybe offer alternative comments from time to time. So there might be a couple of reasons or a more individual interpretation for certain words or phrases that you pick out in your quotes. And finally, your AO3 is your context and also your ability to link the context, so Victorian England, Charles Dickens, the reason he wrote it, with the writer's intention, that is the reason Dickens decided to write the novella. I've just popped there, it was written in 1843. Now, I don't know about you, but personally, numbers just do not stick in my head. And one way that I came up with to kind of remember it, 1843, is I thought, well, half of 8 is 4. And then if I cut 8 down the middle, it makes 3. So 1843, if that's a way that if you're not good with numbers, just like me, you find hard ways of making it stick, that might help you. So this is worth 40 marks, and it's your ability to use quotations from the very important quotes that we've discussed, bring those in to match the question, and also your ability to look at quotations from the extract that you're given on the day. So let's talk about our context. Well, we know that Charles Dickens wrote this to be an allegory, so he wanted it to be a moral message in his story. He had a very deliberate need for the the middle and upper classes to be more charitable to the poor. So it was really important that he wrote a story that would kind of haunt their little minds for a long enough time to make sure that they're charitable after they'd read his book. You might want to use language like it was a political diatribe. So this is a very a strong attack on the government at the time. The government were not supportive of the poor. So he deliberately wrote this to make a change in society, this moral message, and to attack current government policies and laws that were in place. So let's look at Charles Dickens' life at first. So he was born into a middle-class family, but his father was imprisoned for debt. This meant that the family went into a state of poverty, and at the time, child labour was very much a thing. So Charles, at the age of 12, was a victim of child labour. His job then was to put labels on bottles for 12 hours a day to bring money back into the family. He believed strongly in the importance of education. He actually supported ragged schools, worked in collaboration with other people to bring about education, just a basic education really for the poor. So they would support with food, shelter, religion, and a basic sense of education. And in terms of education, Charles Dickens believed that through this, the underclass or working class could escape poverty. Speaking of poverty, how did this come about? Well, during the Industrial Revolution, specifically from 1780, factory owners began to use coal-fired steam engines, and this was hugely beneficial. It eradicated all sort of traditional farming methods, and these steam engines in turn powered the machines, which therefore meant that many of the people that were required were not required anymore. So this brought great fortune into London at the time. It meant that so many people flocked to the city, and in terms of overpopulation, it went from 1 to 6 million people. And if there's an overpopulation, then surely that's going to have a big impact on food supplies. Now, just before I finish this bit, the fact that there were many powered machines and the fact that society just didn't really care about the poor, this led to child labour in factories as well. So they used little children because they had small hands and they were small enough to climb under and behind machinery, work long hours a day because there were no regulations for it. And in very dangerous conditions, many children lost fingers and limbs. You think about like clothing factories, for example. Children would be given the task to go behind machinery and thread needles and thread cotton into needles to make sure that the machines can therefore bring about, I don't know, clothing or materials or whatever. So yeah, child labour was very much a thing during the Industrial Revolution. Because of the overpopulation in the city, there was huge overcrowding. So this caused hunger, this caused disease and crime. There were no proper sewage systems, so families had to share taps and toilets. And it was as a result of this, that looking at this state of overpopulation, that Thomas Malthus, he said that human population was growing faster than the food supplies. This would therefore lead to famine, so people be starving to death, and therefore death. He thought that the existing poor laws were too charitable. He said this is going to reduce the incentive for people to go to work if we're continuously giving them financial support. And this is going to encourage laziness. So he was an advocate for the new poor law. He wanted it to happen. The new poor law meant that if you were unemployed, you were assigned to live and work in a workhouse. If you became part of that workhouse, you would be provided with food and shelter, but they made it deliberately very unpleasant because they didn't want them to, avoid society and not get a job and take part in society again. They wanted to discourage it. So they had them do jobs like crashing huge rocks up into tiny rocks, and then they'd use that for kind of roads, or they'd take huge ropes and they'd ask them to strip it down to its tiny thin strands of rope and then re-twist it to make new ropes. They would have them on a treadmill, so what we now know as a treadmill. So you would walk to exercise. They would use these huge pieces of machinery where people would step on these treadmills and that would turn a generator for the factories. So they would just use them really. Slave labour. So just because of this attitude of Thomas Malthus in society, this was something that Charles Dickens completely disagreed with. And this is why he uses Scrooge as a construct for that sort of upper class, selfish, money-driven member of society. He uses Thomas Malthus's words by saying, decrease the surplus population, to kind of put a mirror up to society at the time to say, you know who these words are from, and to recognise it. He really disagreed with the idea that overpopulation is going to grow so much, but therefore reduce food supplies, everyone's going to die. And he said, actually, there's plenty of food. The rich just need to be a bit more generous. They're not very charitable in society at the moment. So he kind of made that very obvious through the character of Scrooge as well. Next, we're going to look at the idea of Christmas and Christianity and family. I deliberately want you to notice Christmas. This is about Jesus Christ. Anything to do with Christmas, whether it's a Christmas tree or gifts or Christmas cards or Christmas carols, or Christianity, any sort of kind of this motif of fire coming through as well. It all represents warmth and the idea that Jesus is the light of the world. All of it is regarding religion. So anytime you have like a Christmas quote, it's representative of being a good Christian or a bad Christian. So kind of make reference to that in some of your quotes. Or I'll do another video on some of our key quotes as well. So in terms of Christmas, at the start of the 19th century, hardly anyone celebrated it. But by the end, most did. And it's mostly because Queen Victoria at the time, she was kind of like the Will and Kate, kind of the, I don't know, king and queen celebs of the time, and everyone followed them and wanted to know what they were doing. So when Prince Albert, he's a German, he kind of reinitiated Christmas into English, British society. He brought the Christmas tree into the family home, and Queen Victoria was wondering, why have you cut down a tree and you're dragging it into our house? And he said, well, this is the Christmas tradition that we do. And then this literally stuck for England then. So anything to do with Christmas trees being in the home, Christmas cards, Christmas carols, Christmas gifts, the Christmas dinner, all of this came back into our society as a result of Prince Albert marrying Queen Victoria. They were very well known for being a really close-knit family that enjoyed each other's time, enjoyed time with each other. They were hugely grateful to each other and to have the space to have like family holidays, and they were known for being just this beautiful family, very much in love. And so much so, this is the reason why we see Queen Victoria in black clothes, because after her husband died, she only wore black then for the rest of her life, in mourning for her husband's loss. So yeah, very much the idea of the family comes through Victorian society, Queen Victoria's family. And we see the role of the family through the Cratchit family as well. These are the perfect examples of a good Christian, grateful family. And despite their circumstance and being in poverty, they still find happiness in their family life, even though they all know that they're exploited and they're given a hard deal really in society. They don't deserve it. And this can be seen in quotes like brave in ribbons, or it was a small pudding for such a large family, or the founder of the feast, he still celebrates his boss, even though he knows actually he could be paying me more, he's choosing not to. So in terms of Christianity at the time and being a good religious person, this was very much for the middle and upper classes. There was a very strict moral code. So in order to be a good Christian, you should not have any sort of sexual intercourse, or you should not be drinking alcohol or any sort of gambling or anything like that. And you should attend church regularly. This is what society's understanding of being a good Christian was. But Dickens, he disagreed with this. He said, well, actually, good Christians should be charitable, should be good people. They should be seeking out opportunities to be a good person. And we can see that in people like Fred, really, can't we? Fred is Scrooge's foil character. So he's someone that he could and should be like. And that's what Dickens is trying to show us through the character of Fred. Also, the idea of family comes through, because he lost his sister, didn't he? And Fred is the only family member he has left, so he should be very grateful to have this young, charitable, philanthropic gentleman man in his life. Okay, so the society hugely believed in Sabbatarianism, and Sabbath, or the Sabbath day, is basically a Sunday. Society said that Sundays should be kept as rest or to go to church. But Dickens, again, you can see obviously anything Dickens, he disagreed with Sabbatarianism. He realised that, well, actually, if everybody has the Sunday off to rest and to go to church, this is the only day that poor people do have a rest, and you're denying them any sort of enjoyment because nobody was allowed to open up their businesses, everything's shut. So he said that this wasn't really a very supportive idea for the poor at the time. Also, people in poverty, the impoverished, they didn't have ovens, so they used to use the local bakers to warm their food as well. So it meant that every single Sunday, bakers had to close their shops, and then therefore they did not have any sort of hot meal. Let's see what else I've missed out. Okay, in addition to this, the supernatural is very much a part of one of the major themes in A Christmas Carol, and we can see this through all of the ghosts. Why did he deliberately do this? Well, again, he wanted to create this message that would haunt his readers. The Victorian society were really fearful of the supernatural. It was something that scared them. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't make sense of it. So the idea that if you're not charitable, if you're not a good person, like Scrooge, a ghost might turn up to you. You never know when this is going to be, but the underlying messages, this allegory, this moral messages, be a good person because a ghost might come to your house next. So really, he wrote this for the middle and upper classes to make a change in the way that they support and treat the poor. He wanted them to be more charitable. And the only way that he could do it was to kind of manipulate them into doing it. To use Scrooge as a construct, as a message that Thomas Malthus, his words are unfair. It's making everyone else demonise the poor. And that's why he deliberately called his novella A Christmas Carol, because people picking that up, the middle and upper classes who could read, would say, oh, what a lovely book. Maybe it's got Christmas carols in it. Let's buy this for Christmas and read it on Christmas Eve. And really, when they got it home and they read it, they would realise pretty quickly, ooh, wait there, this is not a pleasant, a very nice book. But the message would have already sunk in by then. A ghost is appearing for people who need some sort of moral readjustment. So I hope that has helped. I will put this up and please speak to your teachers about it. You should, and I'll show you in the next video, you should endeavour to use these and kind of pepper them across your response. So for example, if you're analysing a quote like decrease the surplus population, then that would quite nicely link in with any sort of comments about Thomas Malthus at the time, blah, 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 blah. Or if you're talking about child labour, and this was very much an issue for Charles Dickens because he was a victim of child labour at the time, of child labour at the time, or anything to do with, I don't know, the poor laws, ignorance and want, exploitation for the poor. So anything like that, only link it to something in here if it's necessary. If your quote doesn't match something from the context, then I wouldn't put it in. Okay, hope that's helped.